Imagine standing on a quiet field at dawn. The mist clings to the earth like breath on glass, and the only sound you hear is the whisper of steel leaving its sheath. In that silence, long before the clash of armies, long before history books ever remembered his name, walked a man who had never been defeated in battle. His name was Miyamoto Musashi, and he carried with him not just a sword, but a philosophy so sharp it could cut through the illusions of life itself. Musashi fought more than 60 duels and survived countless wars. Yet his greatest conquest was not over other men. It was over himself. His life teaches us something startling. You will lose every battle until you master your own mind. Tonight, as you close your eyes and drift into rest, we will walk together through Musashi's world. From the dusty roads of feudal Japan to the quiet solitude of his cave, where he wrote the Book of Five Rings, his wisdom flows not like a lecture, but like the rhythm of waves. You will not just hear stories of combat. You will feel the stillness of strategy, the weight of discipline, the freedom of detachment. This is not merely history. It is a meditation, and as the night deepens, Musashi's philosophy will guide your breathing, your thoughts, your dreams, until you find the warrior's calm he spent a lifetime seeking. So settle into your bed. Let your body grow heavy, and let us begin Musashi's story. The mist is heavy, rolling gently across the open field before the sun has even thought of rising. There is a silence so deep that you can hear your own breath, slow and steady, the rhythm of life itself. Into this quiet emptiness steps a lone figure. His clothing is plain, his sandals worn thin, and yet every movement radiates a strength that cannot be ignored. This is Miyamoto Musashi, a man who fought more than 60 duels across his lifetime and was never once defeated. He is remembered as Japan's greatest swordsman. But to those who truly study his life, he is something more than that. He is a symbol of the battle we all face within ourselves, the conflict between fear and discipline, illusion and clarity, weakness and mastery. When people imagine Musashi, they often see the warrior on the battlefield, blades flashing, his opponents falling before him one after another. But that image is only half the truth. What made Musashi undefeated was not only the sharpness of his sword, but the sharpness of his mind. He discovered early on that the most dangerous enemies we face are not the ones standing across from us, but the ones that live quietly inside. Doubt, hesitation, arrogance, and fear. These are the forces that cut deeper than steel. Musashi's genius lay in his ability to confront these inner enemies with the same precision he used in combat. The silent battlefield was everywhere he walked. Even when his sword rested in its sheath, Musashi understood that life itself was a constant duel. Every choice, every action, every thought was part of a larger contest. If he allowed laziness to creep in, if he surrendered to desire, if he relied too heavily on past victories, then he would lose not against another warrior, but against himself. And to Musashi, that was the greatest defeat imaginable. As he grew older and his reputation spread, challengers sought him out from across Japan. Some wanted fame, others vengeance, others simply the chance to test themselves against the legend. They carried polished swords and fine armor. They trained in schools that boasted centuries of tradition, and they often came with disciples and spectators who believed they were certain to triumph. But Musashi approached each duel with the same quiet calm. He did not dress for spectacle. He did not rely on the approval of the crowd. Many times, he fought with a wooden sword rather than steel, and still emerged victorious. It was not the weapon that mattered. It was the man who wielded it, and the clarity of his mind. This is why he so often arrived late to his duels. deliberately keeping his opponents waiting under the strain of rising anxiety. He understood that time itself could be a weapon. The longer his rivals waited, the more their thoughts turned against them. Doubt whispered in their ears. Anger stirred in their blood. Their swords may have been sharp, but their minds grew dull with impatience. Musashi walked onto the field already having won half the battle, not because of trickery, but because he had mastered the rhythm of his own mind, while his opponents had not. The silent battlefield stretched into his daily life as well. Musashi lived without the comforts that others craved. He rejected wealth, status, and fine possessions. He ate simple food, wore simple clothes, and often slept outdoors or in the barest of shelters. To outsiders, it may have seemed like poverty, but to Musashi, it was freedom. The fewer attachments he carried, the lighter he became. He knew that if his happiness depended on fragile things, on silk, on coin, on luxury, then he would always be vulnerable. But if he could learn to be content with little, then no enemy could ever rob him of peace. This was his focus, the inner battle. The sword was only a tool, a mirror that reflected the state of the spirit. When he raised it against an opponent, he was not simply cutting down a man. He was cutting through illusion. When he walked away victorious, it was not merely because of his skill, but because he had refused to be ruled by fear or anger or desire. Musashi believed that to defeat others without first mastering oneself was meaningless. And so he trained not only his body, but his awareness. He listened to the silence between breaths. He studied the way light shifted across the ground. He paid attention to the smallest changes in posture, in tone, in rhythm. Life revealed its secrets to those who were awake enough to see them. And Musashi lived in a state of constant attention. As you imagine him now, standing in that misty field, know that his greatest victories were won long before his opponent raised their sword. He had already faced the doubts that paralyze the mind, the fears that shake the heart, the temptations that weaken resolve. He had already crossed the silent battlefield within, and in doing so, he carried into the world a calm that no man could break. And so, Musashi teaches us even now, you will lose every battle until you master yourself. But when you do, when you learn to quiet the noise inside and move with clear purpose, the world itself begins to shift. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to test your strength. Every moment becomes a chance to practice presence. And even as you rest tonight, even as you surrender to sleep, you walk the path of mastery, step by step, breath by breath, in the company of a man who never lost, because he first learned how to conquer himself. The world into which Musashi was born was not gentle, nor forgiving, nor peaceful. It was Japan, at the turn of the 17th century, a land marked by endless conflict and shifting loyalties, a place where the sword was not only a weapon, but the very measure of a man's worth. For centuries, rival warlords had battled for power, tearing the country apart in a storm of ambition and betrayal. Castles rose and fell. Villages burned and were rebuilt. Alliances shifted like the wind. Children grew up watching soldiers march across the horizon, knowing that tomorrow they might belong to a different lord. Survival required more than luck. It required discipline, awareness, and the ability to adapt swiftly to change. It was into this world of ceaseless turbulence that Musashi took his first breath in the year 1584. His father was a samurai, a practitioner of the sword, though by many accounts a harsh and distant man. Some say Musashi's earliest lessons came not from nurture, but from the sharp edge of discipline. Whatever the truth, it is clear that from the very beginning, his childhood was marked by the constant presence of danger. In those days, a man might be challenged on the road without warning. A family could lose everything in the sweep of a single battle. A boy who wished to live had to grow strong, not only in body but in spirit. Feudal Japan was bound by the code of the samurai, the Bushido, a way of life that emphasized loyalty, courage, and the acceptance of death. But while the ideals of Bushido were noble, the reality was far more complicated. Loyalty was often torn apart by political necessity. Honor was sometimes sacrificed for survival. Behind the poetry of the warrior's code lay the harsh truth that life could be extinguished in a heartbeat, and only those who trained relentlessly stood a chance of shaping their own destiny. This was the soil in which Musashi grew. He was not raised in a peaceful household with the luxury of time to dream. He was raised in a world where strength was the currency of existence. From the moment he could walk, he lived under the shadow of conflict. By the time he was 13, he had already fought his first duel. Imagine a boy scarcely more than a child, yet already facing a grown man in combat. The clash of wood against steel, the sweat, the fear, the sudden rush of survival, all of this became Musashi's education. And in that moment, when he emerged victorious, the path before him was set. But Musashi's Japan was more than a backdrop of violence. It was also a society in transition. The long era of warring states was slowly giving way to a fragile unity under the Tokugawa shogunate. Yet even as the land moved toward peace, the memory of chaos remained fresh. Warriors who had lived their entire lives by the sword now faced uncertainty. What did it mean to be a samurai in a world where battles grew fewer and order replaced disorder? For some, it meant clinging to the past, holding tightly to traditions that no longer served them. For Musashi, it meant seeking something deeper, something beyond the endless cycle of war. Discipline was the thread that tied survival to meaning. A man who could not control his hunger, his anger, his desire for comfort, would quickly fall prey to the dangers of the age. Food was not always plentiful. Safety was never guaranteed, and luxury was fleeting. Discipline meant waking before dawn to train, repeating the same motions 1,000 times until they became the body's nature. It meant watching every detail of the world around you, the movement of clouds, the sound of footsteps, the shift of weight in an opponent's stance. In such a world, those who lived carelessly did not live long. The discipline Musashi embraced was not cold or rigid, but alive, flexible, and ever adapting. He saw how clans rose and fell, how fortunes changed overnight, how nothing remained stable for long. To cling to certainty was to invite disaster. Instead, Musashi trained himself to flow with change, to hold no attachment to things that could be taken away. His discipline was not only in the art of combat, but in the art of letting go. When we imagine feudal Japan, we see castles of wood and stone, banners flapping in the wind, the glint of armor beneath the sunday. But beneath those images lies a constant awareness of mortality. Men bowed deeply to their lords, knowing that loyalty might demand their lives before the day was done. Farmers bent over their fields, praying that war would pass them by. Women raised children who might one day march off to fight in battles they could not choose. This was the rhythm of the world Musashi inherited, and it shaped him into the man he would become. His focus on self-mastery was born from necessity. In a world where tomorrow was never promised, the only true possession was the strength of one's own character. Wealth could vanish. Families could be broken. Lords could be overthrown. But the man who mastered himself carried within him something that could not be taken away. This was the discipline Musashi carried through every duel, every journey, every moment of his life. And so, the world of Musashi's youth was harsh, but it was also fertile ground for greatness. The ceaseless wars taught him the cost of weakness. The shifting loyalties taught him the need for independence. The fragile peace that followed taught him the importance of looking beyond the sword, of seeking a deeper philosophy. In every hardship, Musashi found a lesson. In every danger, he found a teacher. And from the soil of feudal Japan, he grew into the undefeated warrior, whose name still echoes across the centuries. The story of Miyamoto Musashi often begins with an image so unlikely that it seems almost like a legend. A boy of only 13, not yet grown into the body of a man, standing face to face with an adult warrior. The boy's hands grip a wooden staff, nothing more than a length of oak sharpened by use and determination. Across from him is a seasoned fighter, armed with a sword of steel, certain of his strength, confident in the advantage of years and experience. Yet what happened on that day, when the mist still clung to the fields and the air was thick with the smell of damp earth, would mark the beginning of Musashi's ascent into history. It was his first duel, and it revealed not only his skill, but something much deeper, a profound understanding of fear, courage, and the mind's power to overcome both. For a boy of 13 to accept a challenge was remarkable in itself. Most children at that age would have been more concerned with learning the discipline of bowing correctly, carrying messages, or serving in minor household duties. Musashi, however, had already grown up in a world where death was not abstract but immediate, where the clash of steel was a language spoken fluently by those around him. His father was a martial artist, harsh in his methods, and whether through encouragement or cruelty, he had already forced the boy to consider the path of the warrior. By the time Musashi stood across from his first opponent, he was no stranger to hardship. Yet even so, one must imagine the pounding of his heart, the trembling of his hands, the weight of standing alone in the field, with nothing but instinct and determination to guide him. The man he faced was named Arima Kihei, a skilled swordsman from the Shinto Ryu school, a style that emphasized precise strikes and controlled movements. Kihei was no minor opponent. He had trained under masters, carried himself with the authority of his art, and believed he could easily put the impetuous boy in his place. Perhaps he thought this would be a lesson in humility, an opportunity to show the village that raw youth should not be mistaken for real strength. He accepted the challenge without hesitation, confident that the outcome was already written. But Musashi did not approach the fight with ordinary nerves. From the accounts we have, he rushed into the duel with wild intensity, abandoning the formalities of stance and etiquette that were common among trained fighters. Instead of waiting, instead of bowing with ceremony, he charged forward with a rawness that shocked his opponent. His staff became an extension of his will, swung with the force of desperation, but also with the precision born of a natural instinct for timing. Before Kihei could adjust, before he could fully bring his blade into the rhythm of combat, Musashi had struck him down, leaving the adult warrior bleeding and broken at the feet of a boy barely into his teens. The story spread quickly. It was not simply the fact of victory that astonished people, but the manner in which it had been achieved. Musashi had faced the moment of fear, the possibility of failure, the certainty of death should he hesitate, and had chosen instead to meet it head-on, charging forward before fear could take root in his body. He did not allow doubt to creep in. He did not wait for the perfect moment. He seized the rhythm of battle and made it his own. This was courage, not in the absence of fear, but in the acceptance of it. He acted before fear had the chance to paralyze him. From this first duel, Musashi revealed a truth that would guide him for the rest of his life. that fear is not conquered by waiting for it to pass, but by moving through it. The heart will race, the hands will sweat, the mind will whisper of danger and defeat. But action, pure and decisive, cuts through fear like a blade through mist. Musashi learned that courage is not something you summon from nowhere, but something you practice in the very act of choosing to move forward. In the years that followed, Musashi would never forget that lesson. He came to understand that most warriors lost, not because they lacked skill, but because they surrendered to hesitation. They allowed fear to dictate the rhythm of the fight. They froze when they should have moved. They doubted when they should have acted. Musashi, by contrast, cultivated the habit of striking decisively, of entering into battle as if he had already accepted death, as if nothing could disturb the clarity of his mind. This made him unpredictable, terrifying, and ultimately unstoppable. But beyond the techniques of combat, that first duel also marked the beginning of Musashi's journey toward self-mastery. To face death at such a young age, and to emerge victorious, planted within him the understanding that survival depended on the spirit as much as on the sword. He knew from then on that each battle was as much a test of the mind as it was of the body. Fear would always be present. The question was not how to eliminate it, but how to move within it, to find clarity even as the heart thundered and the world spun with danger. For those listening now, drifting into rest, imagine the courage of that boy. Imagine the trembling before the first step, the sudden burst of energy as he launched himself forward, the stillness after the strike, when the world seemed to stop. In that silence, Musashi was reborn not as a child, but as a warrior, walking the path that would lead him into legend. And though centuries have passed since that first duel, his lesson remains: that courage is the act of stepping forward into fear, and that mastery begins not with victory over others, but with the decision to master oneself. After that first duel, Musashi's life could have followed a predictable path. He might have entered the service of a lord, bound himself to a clan, and trained under the guidance of an established school of swordsmanship. But instead, he chose a different way, one far less secure, but infinitely more liberating. Musashi became a wanderer, a ronin masterless, unattached, free to move wherever the wind carried him. This decision would shape not only his life, but his philosophy, for the road itself became his greatest teacher. In Japan of the 17th century, the role of a samurai was defined by loyalty to a master. A warrior pledged himself to the service of a daimyo, a feudal lord, and in return received land, status, and purpose. But Musashi rejected that arrangement, whether it was because of his restless spirit, his distrust of authority, or his recognition that true mastery could not be found in the shadow of another man's will. He chose to remain free. By living without a master, he accepted both the hardships and the possibilities of a life defined by his own choices. The life of a wandering swordsman was harsh. Without steady income, Musashi relied on his skills, his wits, and the generosity of those he encountered. Some days brought him the warmth of hospitality. Others left him cold and hungry beneath the open sky. Yet through this life, he forged a discipline that no comfort could soften. He learned to carry little, to need little, and to endure much. His possessions were minimal: a sword, a staff, his clothing, and the resilience of his spirit. This austerity stripped away distractions, leaving him face to face with the essence of survival and the heart of his training. As he wandered, Musashi sought duels not for glory, but for growth. He traveled from town to town, challenging the best fighters of each region, testing himself against the diverse schools of swordsmanship that flourished in Japan at the time. Some fought with rigid formality, emphasizing precise stances and prearranged patterns. Others relied on speed, deception, or brute strength. Musashi observed them all, absorbing their strengths, identifying their weaknesses, and gradually shaping his own unique style. He was not content to imitate. He sought to understand. The Ronin's path gave him a perspective that warriors tied to schools and masters could not achieve. While others were limited by the doctrines of their teachers, Musashi remained free to adapt, to experiment, to innovate. His two-sword style, Nitten Ichi Ryu, was born from this freedom. It broke from tradition, emphasizing fluidity, unpredictability, and the ability to wield both long and short swords in harmony. Many dismissed it as unorthodox, even reckless. But Musashi proved its worth time and again in battle. Yet wandering was not only about combat. The road exposed Musashi to the full spectrum of human life. He saw the poverty of farmers, the arrogance of nobles, the suffering of peasants caught between wars. He walked through burned villages, crossed rivers swollen with spring rains, and climbed mountains where temples whispered of truths beyond the sword. All of these experiences became part of his training. For Musashi, every moment, every encounter, was an opportunity to sharpen not only his blade, but his awareness. Freedom from masters also meant freedom from illusion. Musashi saw how easily men became trapped by pride, by reputation, by the desire for recognition. He refused to be chained by such things. He slept where he could, trained wherever space allowed, and moved on before the world could settle too heavily upon him. His life was stripped to essentials, and in this simplicity, he discovered clarity. He began to see that the true battle was not against opponents, but against the distractions that cloud the mind. As he grew older, Musashi's reputation followed him like a shadow. Wherever he went, challengers appeared, eager to test themselves against the undefeated Ronin. And still, he lived without attachment, without dependence on the comfort of rank or wealth. The wandering life gave him not only skill, but wisdom. The knowledge that mastery is not a destination, but a journey taken step by step, duel by duel, mile by mile. For those listening now, imagine the quiet of the road at night, when Musashi walked alone under the pale light of the moon, his sandals pressed into the dirt, his breath steady, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Each village he passed offered the possibility of another duel, another lesson, another moment to refine his art. But above all, each step carried him further into the solitude that would eventually define his philosophy. To be a Ronin was to live without the safety of a master, but it was also to live without chains. In this wandering, Musashi found not only the shape of his art, but the shape of his soul. The image of a samurai is almost always defined by the long, curved blade of the katana, that legendary sword polished to brilliance, sharp enough to divide a single hair. The katana was considered the very soul of the warrior, a sacred weapon carried with reverence, guarded with honor. Alongside it, the shorter sword, the wakizashi, was worn, a blade used in confined spaces or as a companion in ritual. Together, these two blades were known as the daisho, a pair that symbolized the status of the samurai. For most warriors, however, these swords were not used together in combat. The long sword was primary, and the shorter blade remained sheathed, except in rare circumstances. Tradition dictated that to fight with both simultaneously was impractical, even dishonorable, a violation of the patterns passed down through schools that had codified the art of war for centuries. Musashi, however, was not content to accept tradition for tradition's sake. He had spent his youth wandering, testing himself against the greatest fighters Japan could produce, and he had seen the flaws in rigid systems that clung to established forms. Where others followed the path laid before them, Musashi carved his own. And in doing so, he developed a style that shocked his contemporaries and shaped his legend. The art of wielding two swords at once, a method he named Niten Ichi Ryu, or two heavens as one. At first glance, the idea seemed wild. How could a man possibly control two blades with precision, one in each hand, when a single sword demanded such focus and skill? Yet Musashi proved again and again that the impossible was possible. In his hands, the daisho became not just symbols of status, but living extensions of his spirit. The katana cut with the authority of heaven, the wakizashi struck with the immediacy of earth, and together they moved in harmony like breath and heartbeat. When Musashi raised both swords, it was more than technique. It was philosophy embodied. To fight with two blades required balance, the ability to divide focus without losing clarity. It required an understanding that strength and precision must coexist, that offense and defense could flow together like water. In combat, he could strike with the long sword, while guarding with the short, overwhelm an opponent with alternating blows, or close distance with movements that confused and disoriented. His enemies often trained to anticipate the rhythm of a single blade, but Musashi shattered that rhythm with unpredictability. Against one sword, they had prepared. Against two, they were lost. The symbolism of Musashi's two-sword style ran deeper than combat. To him, the swords were not only weapons, but mirrors of life itself. The long sword represented vision, the capacity to reach far, to see beyond the present moment, to cut through obstacles with patience and reach. The short sword represented immediacy, the ability to adapt in close quarters, to act without delay, to respond to the sudden and the unexpected. To live fully, Musashi believed, one must master both perspectives, the distant and the near, the long-term strategy and the present action. To wield only one was to live only half of life. In his writings, Musashi often emphasized the importance of versatility. He advised warriors to train with all weapons, to adapt to every situation, to avoid being trapped by habit or by preference. The two-sword style was his way of embodying that principle in the most direct way possible. It was proof that the mind could adapt, that the body could be trained to move beyond the boundaries of tradition, that freedom was found not in imitation, but in innovation. We might imagine him standing on a quiet field, one sword long, one sword short, his stance low and fluid, his eyes calm and steady. He does not grip them with tension, but with a relaxed awareness, as though the blades were simply extensions of his breath. His opponent circles, uncertain, unsure of where the next strike will fall. And Musashi waits, patient as stone, flowing as water, ready to move with the rhythm of the moment. The clash comes, swift as lightning, and within heartbeats it is over. The two swords fall into stillness once more, their wielder untouched, his philosophy proven true in the silence after the storm. The symbolism of the two swords also reached beyond battle into Musashi's inner life. To him, they reflected the dual nature of existence, strength and subtlety, aggression and restraint, body and mind. To carry two swords was to remember that no single quality could define mastery. A warrior who relied only on power would fall to cunning. A warrior who relied only on cunning would fall to strength. Balance was everything. In learning to wield two blades, Musashi was teaching himself to live with balance, to cultivate harmony between opposites, and so, his style became not only a method of combat, but a meditation. Each duel was a chance to refine not just technique, but self-awareness. The two swords moved as one, just as heaven and earth exist in union, just as breath and body sustain each other, just as fear and courage coexist in the heart. Through this art, Musashi revealed the deeper lesson. Mastery is not found in choosing one side of life, but in holding both and moving between them with grace. As you rest, you might think of your own two swords, the plans you make for the future, long and far-reaching, and the actions you take in the present, short and immediate. The vision of where you wish to go, and the courage to step forward now. Musashi teaches that both are necessary. Both must be practiced. Both must be held together in balance. To live with only one is to live unprepared. To live with both is to walk with clarity through the silent battlefield of existence. Musashi's life was filled with duels, victories, and journeys, but as he grew, his understanding of combat evolved into something far greater than the clash of swords. To him, each fight was more than a contest of strength. It was a mirror held up to the essence of life itself. He began to see that strategy, the art of choosing when and how to act, applied not only to the battlefield, but to every moment of existence. And so he wrote, "Not for warriors alone, but for all who sought mastery of their lives. Strategy is the way." When Musashi spoke of strategy, he did not mean clever tricks or hidden schemes. He meant clarity, the ability to see reality as it is, without illusion, without distraction, and to respond to it with decisive action. In the heat of battle, a warrior who hesitates for even a breath may fall. In life, hesitation can mean wasted years, lost opportunities, or choices made too late to matter. Strategy, then, was the art of perceiving clearly, of moving with rhythm, of acting with purpose. Combat was the purest form of this truth. Because in combat, everything was stripped bare. There was no time for pretense, no room for lies. A man's preparation was revealed in an instant, his weaknesses laid open, his spirit exposed. Musashi learned that the one who saw most clearly was the one who triumphed. Not the one with the strongest muscles or the sharpest blade, but the one who understood rhythm, who sensed the flow of the fight, who could enter into harmony with reality itself. From this realization, Musashi began to teach that strategy was life's foundation. He spoke of rhythm, not only in combat, but in all things. The rhythm of the seasons, the rhythm of work and rest, the rhythm of relationships and endeavors. To move against rhythm was to struggle endlessly. To move with rhythm was to achieve with effortlessness. A warrior who struck at the wrong time would miss, no matter how strong. A farmer who planted in the wrong season would starve, no matter how skilled. A person who spoke without awareness of timing would be ignored, no matter how wise. Rhythm was everything. Strategy, therefore, was the cultivation of awareness. Musashi trained himself not only in weapons, but in observation. He studied the angle of shadows, the sound of footsteps, the changes of wind. He believed that one who sees everything, even the smallest details, can never be surprised. To see clearly was to live securely, and in teaching this, Musashi transformed combat from an art of death into an art of living. But Musashi also knew that strategy required detachment. A man attached to victory might lose because he became desperate. A man attached to possessions might be distracted by fear of loss. A man attached to reputation might act foolishly to protect his name. The strategist must be free of such bonds. He must move as the situation requires, without clinging, without hesitation. In this detachment lay freedom, and in freedom lay victory. To live strategically was to accept that every moment was a duel, even if no swords were drawn. The duel between comfort and discipline, between illusion and truth, between fear and courage. Musashi wrote that a warrior must live as if he were already dead, not in despair, but in freedom. When death is accepted, fear loses its grip. When fear is gone, clarity shines through. And with clarity, one can act without hesitation, whether in battle or in the simple decisions of daily life. Imagine him now, seated in quiet meditation within the cave, where he spent his final years, writing by dim light the lessons he had carved from a lifetime of conflict. His words were not only for the warriors of his age, but for anyone who sought to live with presence. He told us that combat is a mirror, that life itself is the battlefield, that every day we rise to meet challenges that test the sharpness of our awareness and the steadiness of our spirit. For Musashi, the sword was only the beginning. Strategy was the true weapon, and it could be carried by anyone, whether they wielded steel or not. To live strategically was to meet each moment with presence, to act when the time was right, to rest when rest was needed, to speak when words had weight, and to be silent when silence was stronger. It was a way of living that transformed chaos into clarity, struggle into growth, and uncertainty into rhythm. As you rest now, you may feel the wisdom of Musashi settling into your own rhythm. The rise and fall of your breath is its own strategy, its own balance between movement and stillness. Each inhale prepares, each exhale releases. In this quiet, you are practicing what Musashi discovered: that combat, like life, is not about defeating others, but about seeing clearly, moving with purpose, and mastering oneself. The wisdom of Miyamoto Musashi was not born only in duels or in the fire of human conflict. Much of it came from his deep observation of the world around him, of the rivers that curved gently through valleys, the mountains that rose immovable against the sky, the endless cycle of the seasons, each one bringing its own lessons of change and endurance. To Musashi, nature was more than background. It was teacher, guide, and mirror. He saw in the turning of the earth the same principles that governed the swing of a sword. He understood that timing was not simply a matter of speed or calculation, but of harmony with the rhythm that pulses through all things. In the stillness before battle, he would listen, not only to the sound of his opponent's breath, but to the sound of wind moving through grass, to the flow of water nearby, to the shifting of clouds across the Sunday. Nature was never silent. It carried with it a music that could be heard if one learned how to listen. And Musashi taught himself to hear it with an intensity that most people never reached. He discovered that to align with nature's rhythm was to act at exactly the right moment, not too soon, not too late, but in perfect accord with what was already unfolding. He often compared combat to the seasons. There is the spring of engagement, when both fighters circle, cautious and probing, each measuring the other. There is the summer of intensity, when strikes come fast, and heat fills the air with urgency. There is the autumn of exhaustion, when the pace slows and mistakes begin to creep in. And finally, there is the winter of resolution, when silence falls, and one is left standing, while the other lies still. To Musashi, these rhythms were not artificial. They were reflections of the cycles that move through every living thing. He learned to recognize them to anticipate them, and to enter them like a farmer stepping into his field at planting time, ready to move with the earth rather than against it. Timing became his greatest weapon. He knew that a strike delivered at the wrong moment, no matter how powerful, was wasted. But a strike at the exact moment when his opponent's balance faltered, when their mind wandered for the briefest instant, that was the strike that ended the fight. Just as a fisherman waits patiently for the ripple of movement below the surface, Musashi waited for rhythm to reveal itself. And when it did, his blade moved as naturally as a leaf carried by the current. In his writings, he spoke often of the necessity of rhythm in all pursuits. The craftsman, who shapes wood with tools, must feel the grain and cut in harmony with it. The musician must enter the pulse of the song, not rushing ahead or dragging behind, but keeping with the beat that binds it together. Even in conversation, rhythm determines understanding. Words spoken too quickly overwhelm. Words spoken too slowly lose their weight. To live well is to find rhythm and to dwell within it. Musashi urged his readers not to separate the world into compartments. The same principles that guided swordplay could be seen in the planting of rice, in the beating of drums, in the patient unfolding of dawn into day. He insisted that the strategist must know the rhythm of all things, because life itself was the ultimate battlefield, and rhythm was its language. He advised learning not just from masters of combat, but from dancers, poets, carpenters, and farmers. Each, in their way, was attuned to rhythm, and each could teach the warrior how to move more fluidly with the flow of existence. Perhaps the deepest rhythm Musashi observed was the inevitability of change. Nothing in nature remains constant. Rivers shift their courses. Mountains crumble with time. Trees shed leaves and bloom again. To resist change is to resist life itself. Many warriors lost because they tried to force battles into the shape they expected, clinging to forms and traditions that no longer matched the moment. Musashi's genius lay in his ability to see when the rhythm changed, to adapt instantly, to flow with it as water flows around stone. This is why he won, time and again, not by overpowering, but by harmonizing. Imagine for a moment Musashi standing alone in a field, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword, his eyes scanning the horizon. The clouds shift above him, throwing light and shadow in a dance across the earth. A bird takes flight, its wings catching the wind with effortless grace. Musashi watches, not as a mere observer, but as a participant. He feels the stillness in the air before the gust, the tension in the silence before the bird lifts. This is rhythm. This is timing. And in that awareness, he understands his own place within the vast music of the world. As you lie still now, listening to these words, you too are part of this rhythm. Your breath rises and falls like the tide. Your heartbeat drums its steady song. You are not separate from nature but woven into its fabric. Musashi's teaching invites you to notice this, to feel the rhythm that carries you, and to rest within it, as natural and as inevitable as the seasons themselves. The wandering years gave Musashi countless lessons, but the greatest of them came not from the clash of swords, but from the silence of solitude. Again and again, he stepped away from the noise of society, from the clamor of students, rivals, and lords, and chose instead to live alone. He slept beneath trees, in ruined shrines, in abandoned huts, and eventually, in the cave called Raigando, where he wrote his final reflections. For Musashi, solitude was not loneliness. It was discipline, a deliberate act of sharpening the mind by withdrawing from distractions, a way of facing himself without escape. Life in solitude stripped away illusions. Without servants, there was no one to prepare food or sweep floors. Without companions, there was no one to flatter or argue with. Without the bustle of cities, there was no theater of reputation to perform for. Alone, Musashi had only his body, his thoughts, and the vast silence of the world. It was in this silence that his clarity deepened, for he could see without distortion, hear without interruption, and think without interference. Solitude taught him simplicity. His meals were often little more than rice or roots gathered from the land. His possessions were few. He carried what he could hold, and nothing more. This austerity was not deprivation, but liberation. The less he depended upon, the freer he became. He knew that in the chaos of battle or the uncertainty of life, those who rely on comforts are easily broken. By denying himself luxury, he trained his spirit to remain steady in hardship. But solitude also demanded courage. Many fear being alone, because in the silence, the mind begins to speak more loudly. Regrets rise to the surface. Doubts echo. The face we show, the world disappears. And the face we keep hidden looks back at us inescapably. Musashi embraced this confrontation. He allowed solitude to reveal his weaknesses, his attachments, his fears. By facing them directly, he learned to master them. He knew that if a man cannot sit alone with himself, then he will always be a stranger to his own spirit. During these solitary years, Musashi's training became not only physical but spiritual. He practiced with his swords until their weight disappeared from his awareness, until they felt as natural as his own limbs. He painted and carved, teaching his hands to create beauty as well as destruction. He meditated on the cycles of nature, the impermanence of life, the silence of the void. His solitude was not an escape from the world, but a preparation to meet it more fully, with greater clarity and balance. The cave of Regondo, where he spent his final days, stands as a symbol of this discipline of solitude. It was there, seated among stone walls carved by time, that he wrote the Book of 5 Rings. With death approaching, he did not seek company, comfort, or recognition. He sought only to write down what he had learned, to leave behind a map of the path he had walked. The words he penned there were not the product of noise, but of silence. They were distilled from a life lived close to the bone, honed in solitude, until they gleamed with the sharpness of truth. His choice to live alone was not permanent. He returned at times to teach, to duel, to advise, but it remained the foundation of his philosophy. Solitude was the forge in which his mind was tempered, the whetstone that sharpened his spirit. Without it, his victories would have been incomplete, his wisdom shallow. With it, he became more than a swordsman. He became a man who had mastered himself. For those listening now, perhaps drifting toward rest, Musashi's solitude offers its own lesson. In the quiet of night, when the world falls away, you too can touch that stillness. You too can listen to the voice within, not as an enemy to fear, but as a teacher to hear. In solitude, the mind settles, the heart steadies, and the spirit grows clear. Musashi lived alone to sharpen himself. Tonight, in your own solitude, you can let the quiet sharpen you, gently, like a blade polished in moonlight, smooth and steady, ready for the dawn that will come. In the world of the samurai, it was common to see warriors adorned in fine armor, their swords polished until they shone like mirrors, their homes decorated with silk screens and lacquered wood. The samurai class enjoyed privileges, and with those privileges often came the pursuit of wealth, comfort, and recognition. Yet Musashi, despite his unmatched skill and the fame that followed him from province to province, chose a path that ran in the opposite direction. He rejected wealth. He turned away from fame. He denied himself the comforts that so many sought. This was not an accident of circumstance, nor was it the result of poverty forced upon him. It was a deliberate choice, a philosophy of detachment that shaped every step of his life. To understand Musashi's rejection of desire, one must imagine the countless moments when such desires must have tempted him. After his victories, lords could have offered him positions of status, stipends of gold, a household to call his own. After all, to be undefeated in battle, to be a man whose name alone could inspire awe and fear, was to hold a kind of currency that few could ignore. And yet, Musashi turned away. He lived as a wanderer, often in ragged clothing, carrying little more than his weapons and the will that guided him. His detachment was not born of disdain for others, nor of arrogance. It was born of clarity. Musashi understood that wealth, fame, and comfort were traps as much as they were treasures. A warrior who clung to wealth became vulnerable to fear of losing it. A man who sought fame became bound by the expectations of others, enslaved by the need to maintain an image. One who grew accustomed to comfort weakened his spirit. For comfort softens the edges of discipline and dulls the sharpness of awareness. Musashi wanted none of these chains. In his later writings, particularly in the Dokudo, or The Path of Aloneness, he made his stance plain. One of his guiding principles was to accept life without greed, to despise luxury, to avoid the pursuit of pleasure as an end in itself. He urged those who followed his path to live lightly, to hold no attachment to material possessions, to walk as though nothing external could add to or diminish the value of the spirit. To many, these words might seem harsh, even joyless. But to Musashi, they represented freedom. By rejecting wealth, he freed himself from dependence. His survival did not rest on coins or the favor of lords. He needed little, and therefore nothing could be taken from him. By turning from fame, he kept his spirit centered. He did not act for the eyes of others but for the clarity of his own mind. And by denying comfort, he trained himself to endure hardship without complaint, to remain steady when others would falter. His detachment made him untouchable, not because he had more than others, but because he required less. Musashi's life was a continual stripping away, a refusal to allow desire to cloud the mind. In battle, this detachment gave him an advantage. Many warriors entered duels with pride on the line, desperate to prove themselves, eager to preserve their reputations. Such desires created tension. Tension slowed the hand, distracted the mind, made the body rigid. Musashi, detached from these desires, entered with clarity. He fought not to prove himself, not to gain honor, but to embody presence. In this, he became terrifying. For an opponent who does not fear, loss cannot be manipulated, and an opponent who seeks nothing cannot be defeated. But Musashi's philosophy extended beyond the battlefield. His rejection of desire was not limited to moments of combat. It permeated his daily existence. He refused to decorate his life with luxuries, choosing instead to live simply. His meals were basic, his clothing unadorned, his possessions few. He traveled light, carrying only what he could hold, as though each item he owned required proof of necessity. In this simplicity, he found clarity of thought, freedom of movement, and a resilience that wealth and comfort could never provide. Even as age crept upon him, Musashi did not allow himself the indulgence of luxury. In his final years, when others might have sought comfort in warm homes and the company of admirers, He withdrew into a cave, Reigando, where he lived alone, writing his final reflections. The cave was barren, a hollow of stone with little light. Yet for Musashi, it was enough. In the silence of that cave, without the distractions of wealth, fame, or comfort, he completed his greatest work of self-mastery. His detachment from desire carries a lesson that reaches far beyond the life of a warrior. Even today, it speaks to the restless craving that so often drives people into exhaustion. Musashi reminds us that wealth, fame, and comfort are fleeting, that their pursuit often leaves us emptier than we began. Freedom is not in gathering more, but in needing less. Mastery is not in having, but in being. As you drift into sleep, consider the quiet strength of Musashi's path. A man who could have claimed riches chose instead to carry only what was essential. A man whose name echoed through the land chose instead to step away from applause. A man who could have wrapped himself in comfort chose instead the bare walls of a cave. In rejecting desire, he did not diminish his life. He sharpened it, and in that sharpness, he left behind a lesson as enduring as the steel of his sword. Musashi's detachment from desire was matched by another discipline just as profound: the art of observation. To him, the eyes were more than tools for seeing. They were instruments for understanding. To master the sword was to master awareness, and awareness required that one notice everything: movement and stillness, shadow and light, sound and silence. A warrior who failed to observe fully was already defeated. But one who could see clearly, without distraction, could anticipate, adapt, and act with precision. Musashi trained himself to observe in ways that surpassed ordinary seeing. He taught that the eyes should not fixate on a single point, but should take in the whole field of vision. To lock onto one detail was to miss the movement at the edges. He advised his students to look broadly, to see the opponent and the space around him, to notice the flicker of a hand, the shift of weight in the legs, the tightening of a jaw before a strike. By seeing everything, the warrior dissolved surprise, but his observation extended beyond battle. Musashi applied the same attentiveness to the world itself. He studied the way carpenters measured wood, the way farmers bent to plant in rhythm with the earth, the way birds lifted into the air on unseen currents of wind. Each observation became a lesson, another piece of knowledge that could be woven into his strategy. For Musashi, nothing was irrelevant. Every detail carried meaning. Every moment revealed something for the one who was truly awake. Stillness, too, was an opportunity for observation. When the world fell quiet, Musashi would sit in silence, letting his eyes rest not on a single thing, but on the fullness of the scene before him. In the stillness of mountains, he learned endurance. In the stillness of rivers, he learned flow. In the stillness of clouds, he learned change. These were not metaphors to him, but truths, absorbed into his very being through the practice of attentive observation. Observation, however, was not passive. Musashi did not merely collect impressions. He trained himself to respond. He believed that to see clearly was only the first step. The strategist must act upon what is seen, aligning action with awareness. In combat, this meant striking at the precise moment when an opponent's balance faltered, or adjusting stance when the ground beneath shifted. In life, it meant recognizing the seasons of opportunity and seizing them before they passed. His practice of observation required discipline of the mind as much as the eyes. He warned against being deceived by appearances, against mistaking the surface for the truth. A fighter may look confident while trembling within. A landscape may look calm while hiding dangers in shadow. To observe deeply was to see beyond the obvious, to pierce through illusion, to understand what lay beneath. This kind of observation demanded patience, humility, and the willingness to look again and again until clarity emerged. Musashi's students often marveled at his ability to notice things others overlooked. He could sense when a man's spirit wavered even before the first strike. He could predict a storm by watching the movement of leaves. He could judge a craftsman's skill by the sound of a single hammer stroke. This was not magic, but discipline, the refinement of observation, until it became second nature, until the world revealed itself without effort. In his writings, he urged those who sought mastery to practice observation at all times. Not only when training, he recommended watching people in the marketplace, listening to the tone of conversations, noticing the way hands gestured or eyes shifted. He encouraged observing nature, studying the way waves broke upon rocks, the way trees bent in the wind without breaking. Each act of observation sharpened awareness, building a mind that could see fully, clearly, and without distortion. To live with such attentiveness was to walk in constant readiness. Surprise became rare, because little escaped notice. Fear diminished, because uncertainty shrank before clarity. Even in stillness, Musashi observed, for stillness was never empty. The world always spoke, always moved, always revealed itself to those with eyes willing to see. As you drift now toward sleep, imagine Musashi seated in quiet contemplation, his gaze wide and calm, seeing not only what is before him, but what is beyond. He is not tense, not straining to focus. His vision is relaxed, soft, yet complete. In this softness lies power. In this attentiveness lies mastery. His art of observation was not only the key to victory in battle, but the key to understanding life itself. For to see clearly is to live clearly. And in the gentle rhythm of your breath, in the stillness of this moment, you too can touch that clarity, watching without grasping, noticing without clinging, seeing everything, even in stillness. The Book of Five Rings remains Musashi's most enduring legacy, a text written near the end of his life, when his hands had already held countless swords, when his eyes had already watched the rise and fall of many men, and when his heart had grown calm enough to look back on his own journey. Within the pages of this book, he did not merely record techniques of combat, nor did he offer only advice for those who wished to duel. What he left behind was something far deeper, a philosophy arranged around 5 elements, each one a doorway into understanding the art of life, as well as the art of war. Earth, water, fire, wind, and void. 5 simple words, yet in them lies an entire map of how to stand firm, how to move fluidly, how to strike decisively, how to learn from others, and finally, how to dissolve into the emptiness from which all things arise. Musashi chose these elements not because they were exotic, but because they were familiar. Every man of his age knew the mountain's immovability, the river's flow, the flame's intensity, the air's breath, and the quiet emptiness of space itself. By grounding his philosophy in the language of nature, he ensured that his teaching would be accessible not only to warriors, but to anyone willing to observe the world around them. Each element became a mirror, showing a different dimension of strategy, a different way of aligning one's spirit with the rhythms of existence. The first element he described was earth, the foundation. Earth symbolized the ground beneath one's feet, the stability without which no house could stand, no battle could be fought. To Musashi, earth was the discipline of basics, the mastery of fundamentals, the recognition that no matter how lofty one's skill or vision, all rested upon the solid ground of practice, posture, and presence. The second was water. Ever shifting, ever adapting. Water does not resist the shape of its container. It fills a bowl, flows around a stone, seeps into cracks, or crashes with force as a wave. In water, Musashi saw the principle of flexibility, the necessity of flowing with circumstances rather than rigidly opposing them. Water teaches that form is nothing without adaptability, that victory often comes not from stubborn strength, but from fluid resilience. The third was fire, the essence of combat itself. Fire burns hot and fast, devouring everything in its path, overwhelming with intensity. To Musashi, fire represented the moment of engagement, the surge of energy that must be unleashed without hesitation when the time is right. In battle, fire is the strike that ends hesitation. In life, fire is the courage to act when action is demanded. The fourth was wind, the air that moves unseen yet shapes everything it touches. Wind, in Musashi's teaching, referred to the styles of others, the ways of rival schools, the currents of thought and tradition that swirl around us. To study wind was to study not only oneself, but one's opponents, to understand their patterns, to sense their weaknesses. Wind is observation outward, an openness to learn from the movements of others, not to imitate them blindly, but to recognize their strengths and their flaws. The final element was void, the most mysterious and profound. Void is nothingness, emptiness, the silence from which all sound emerges, the space from which all forms arise. In the void, Musashi saw the ultimate truth of existence, that mastery lies not in clinging to form, but in transcending it, that the highest strategy is to act without attachment, without fear, without even the thought of victory or defeat. Void is the realm where awareness becomes pure, where one moves without hesitation, as naturally as breathing. Taken together, these 5 elements were not merely categories, but stages of growth, dimensions of the same path: to stand upon earth, to flow like water, to burn with fire, to listen to wind, and to dissolve into void. This was the journey Musashi mapped for those who sought mastery. His Book of 5 Rings was more than instruction for swordsmen. It was a meditation on life itself, written with the clarity of a man who had stripped away everything unnecessary until only truth remained. Imagine him in the cave at Raigando. The light dim, his body aged, but his mind sharp as ever. He dips the brush into ink and lets his hand move across the paper. Steady, as if guiding a blade, he writes of earth, of water, of fire, of wind, and of void, each word chosen with precision, each phrase carrying the weight of a lifetime. Outside the cave, the river continues to flow. The mountains remain unmoved. The wind rustles through trees, and the sky stretches into emptiness. Musashi, alone with his thoughts, captures these elements in words, not to bind them, but to point toward the truths they reveal. For the reader, for the listener, for anyone willing to enter the rhythm of these 5 elements, there is a lesson as relevant now as it was centuries ago. Life is not so different from battle. We require earth to ground us, water to help us adapt, fire to ignite our courage, wind to teach us through others, and void to remind us of the freedom beyond all form. Musashi's 5 elements are not distant metaphors but living realities, available in every breath, every choice, every moment of awareness. As you rest now, you may feel yourself carried by these elements, the firmness of earth beneath your body, the flow of breath like water in your chest, the warmth of fire in the steady beat of your heart, the whisper of wind in the quiet around you, and the deep, boundless void in the stillness that holds everything together. These are the elements Musashi spoke of, not as abstract ideas, but as living truths. And in their rhythm, you may find your own path to clarity. When Musashi wrote of earth, the foundation of all things, he was not only speaking of soil beneath the feet or the stones that built castles. He was pointing to something deeper, something within the human spirit. Earth represented the beginning, the grounding, the strength that comes from knowing where one stands. Without earth, no structure can rise. Without earth, no warrior can endure. To Musashi, the principle of earth was the mastery of fundamentals, the unshakable presence that allowed all other skills to grow. He compared earth to the mountain, vast and unmoving. The mountain does not chase after clouds or tremble with passing storms. It remains, steady and patient, through the turning of seasons, through the ages of men. For Musashi, to ground oneself like a mountain meant cultivating a spirit that could not be disturbed by circumstance. Victory and defeat, praise and blame, gain and loss, these were storms passing over the surface. The mountain remained unchanged. In the same way, a warrior must anchor himself, must train until posture, balance, and awareness are as natural as standing on solid ground. Earth was also the body, the stance, the feet pressing into the ground. Musashi insisted that strategy began with how one stood, how one held the sword, how one moved from step to step. A weak foundation led to collapse, no matter how skilled the hands or quick the eyes. He wrote that to master earth was to master the simplest forms, the basics repeated until they became unshakable. To neglect them was to build castles upon sand. But earth was more than physical. It was also the discipline of the mind. Just as the soil receives seeds and gives them strength to grow, the mind must be cultivated with patience, with repetition, with steadiness. Musashi knew that many warriors sought advanced techniques, elaborate styles, secret methods. Yet he taught that true mastery came from the fundamentals, practiced with devotion, until the spirit itself grew firm. Earth was the training ground of patience, the willingness to repeat what seemed simple until it became second nature. Grounding oneself like earth also meant being rooted in reality. Musashi despised illusion, whether it came in the form of empty ceremony, hollow pride, or fantasies of glory. To him, such illusions were like clouds that distracted from the mountain beneath. Earth demanded clarity, a focus on what was true and solid, not what was imagined or wished for. A warrior grounded in earth faced the world as it was, not as he wanted it to be. And because of this, he could endure. In Life Beyond Combat, Musashi's teaching of earth offered the same wisdom. To ground oneself like a mountain is to stand firm in values, to remain steady in the face of change, to return always to the basics when chaos threatens. In work, it may mean practicing the essentials with patience rather than rushing ahead. In relationships, it may mean standing firm in honesty rather than being swayed by fleeting moods. In spirit, it may mean remembering that storms pass, but the mountain remains. Musashi himself embodied this principle. Despite his wanderings, despite the hardships he endured, he remained rooted in discipline. He carried little, sought little, and returned always to practice. His grounding was not in wealth or recognition, but in the fundamentals of awareness, posture, timing, and presence. This grounding gave him the strength to adapt, to strike, to learn, and finally, to dissolve into emptiness. Without earth, none of the other elements could be realized. With earth, all became possible. As you close your eyes and sink into rest, you may imagine yourself upon a mountain. The air is clear, the ground steady beneath you. Winds may pass, storms may roll, yet you remain unmoved, rooted in the strength of earth. Your breath becomes the soil, steady and patient. Your heart becomes the stone, solid and enduring. In this grounding, there is peace. In this grounding, there is clarity. Musashi's earth is not distant. It is here, beneath you, within you, the foundation of all things. Water is the gentlest of all things, and yet it carves valleys through stone, shapes mountains, and nourishes life itself. It is formless, without edges of its own, yet it takes the shape of every vessel it enters, every stream it runs along, every ocean it fills. For Musashi, the element of water was not only a metaphor for flexibility, but a principle for survival and mastery. He recognized that just as water adapts to its surroundings without resistance, so too must the warrior and the strategist learn to flow with circumstance rather than crash helplessly against it. When Musashi observed rivers, he noticed their patience. A river does not rush blindly, but finds its way through terrain, around obstacles, over time, wearing down even the hardest of rocks. A stream does not rebel when its course bends. It moves with ease, guided by gravity, obeying the laws of nature. From this, Musashi saw a truth: that strength is not always in rigidity, but often in yielding, in bending when needed, in flowing, where resistance would only bring ruin. He taught that to embody water was to cultivate formlessness. In combat, this meant avoiding predictable stances, avoiding rigid adherence to form. Too many fighters, he observed, became prisoners of their training. They repeated the same motions so often that they could not adapt when reality shifted. A warrior who clung to form became brittle, like ice that shatters under pressure. Musashi sought to dissolve the boundaries of form, to make himself fluid enough to respond to anything. When an opponent pressed close, he became like a stream slipping between stones. When the opponent retreated, he became like a wave surging forward to fill the space. Water is not weak. When gathered, it has a force beyond imagining. The same element that drips softly from leaves can rise into waves that crush ships. Musashi understood this duality. He advised learning not only how to yield like a gentle stream, but also how to strike like a crashing tide. The adaptability of water meant knowing when to flow softly and when to surge with overwhelming momentum. Water also revealed to Musashi the importance of calmness. In still water, everything is reflected clearly. The moon, the trees, the stars, even the smallest detail appears on its surface. But when water is disturbed, the reflection is broken, distorted, unreadable. So too is the mind. A warrior whose thoughts are turbulent cannot see clearly, cannot perceive the subtle shifts in rhythm, cannot anticipate the flow of the fight. A mind that is still like calm water, however, reflects reality without distortion. Musashi cultivated this stillness, training himself to remain clear and steady, even when chaos raged around him. Yet he also knew that water never clings. It flows onward, always moving. To embody water was to avoid attachment, to let go of moments that had passed, to move fluidly from one strike to the next, from one breath to the next. Just as the river does not look back at the stone it has passed, Musashi taught that a warrior should not cling to a missed strike or a lost opportunity. The flow continues, and victory belongs to those who move with it. Musashi's life itself reflected water. He wandered freely, unbound by master or school, moving from place to place, as though carried by currents. He learned from each encounter, adapting to each challenge, absorbing knowledge without resistance. His philosophy was not rigid doctrine but flowing wisdom, shaped by observation, experience, and adaptation. He did not try to bend the world to his will. Instead, he adjusted his approach to match the world, flowing around obstacles, seeping into opportunities, carving his path with the patience of a river. In your own rest tonight, you may feel the spirit of water in your breath. Each inhale enters like a tide. Each exhale flows out, effortless and calm. You do not force the breath. It comes and goes of its own rhythm, adapting to your body's needs. Like water, your breath fills you, nourishes you, and then moves on. Musashi would remind us that to live with water is to accept the flow, to allow life to carry us when resistance only exhausts us, and to surge forward when the time calls for strength. Water teaches us to be flexible, to remain calm, to reflect reality clearly, and to keep moving. Musashi placed it second after earth, because once the foundation is steady, one must learn how to move without being bound by rigidity. Earth gives stability, but water gives adaptability. And in their balance, the path of mastery continues to unfold, as endless and as patient as the river flowing toward the sea. If water was patience, adaptability, and flow, fire was its opposite in rhythm and energy. Where water waits and yields, fire seizes, consumes, and transforms. Musashi placed fire at the heart of combat. For there comes a time when waiting and watching must end, when the moment to act arrives with urgency, and in that instant, hesitation is fatal. Fire, to him, was the moment of battle itself, the strike delivered with intensity, presence, and total commitment. When a flame ignites, it does not ask permission. It leaps forward, consuming fuel, spreading heat, transforming everything in its reach. This was the quality Musashi sought to cultivate in the moment of engagement. He taught that once the time for action comes, one must move with the certainty of fire, without doubt, without hesitation, without retreat. A sword raised must fall. A strike begun must finish. The mind must burn with presence so complete that nothing distracts, nothing divides its attention. Fire is relentless. In combat, Musashi knew that intensity breaks opponents. A man facing a fighter who surges forward with overwhelming energy often falters before the sword even reaches him. The heat of presence can burn through confidence, stripping away composure. Musashi himself used this principle in many duels, pressing forward with such force that his opponents, though trained and armed, felt themselves consumed by the sheer blaze of his will. He wrote that a warrior must learn not only to act with fire but to embody it, to let the spirit burn so brightly that it intimidates before the blade strikes. Yet fire was not merely aggression. Musashi knew that fire uncontrolled burns everything, even the one who wields it. True strategy required not reckless rage, but directed intensity, like a flame shaped by a lantern, focused, guided, contained. He taught that in battle, one must strike hard but not waste energy, commit fully but not lose balance, blaze brightly but not burn out too soon. Fire was presence. Yes, but presence that knew its purpose. Musashi also recognized the rhythm of fire in the shortness of battle. No duel, no matter how intense, could last forever. Like fire, combat was quick, decisive, leaving either victory or ash in its wake. A warrior who delayed, who hesitated, risked losing the flame of opportunity. Musashi urged his readers to train for immediacy, to learn to strike not only with power, but with timing, to unleash energy in the exact moment when it mattered most. This was fire's essence: decisive action, at the right time, without hesitation. But fire, in Musashi's teaching, extended beyond combat. In life, there are moments when the time for patience ends, when the waiting must give way to doing. The project must be begun, the words must be spoken, the step must be taken. Fire is the courage to act in those moments, to burn through fear and uncertainty with decisive presence. Many people linger too long in thought, like wood piled but unlit. Musashi reminded us that action itself is the flame, that without fire, nothing is transformed. His own life showed this again and again. At 13, he fought his first duel, charging forward, without hesitation. In countless battles afterward, he struck with immediacy, surprising opponents with his refusal to linger in ceremony or delay. Even his choice to live as a ronin, wandering free rather than binding himself to a lord, was fire, the act of burning through convention and stepping boldly into his own path. Fire was the element of courage, the willingness to risk, the strength to act. Presence was central to fire. Musashi insisted that when battle begins, the mind must be nowhere else. Regret has no place. Fear of outcome has no place. Thought of past mistakes or future plans has no place. The moment of fire demands complete immersion, the kind of focus where the body and mind move as one, where every ounce of energy is directed into the now. He wrote that in such presence lies victory, for hesitation and distraction are the cracks where defeat enters. As you rest now, you may imagine fire, not as destruction, but as transformation. The warmth in your chest, the beat of your heart, the pulse of life itself is fire. It is not reckless, but steady. The glow that keeps you alive, the flame that gives warmth in the dark. Musashi invites us to remember that when the time comes to act, to speak, to step forward, we must do so like fire, decisive, present, and unafraid. For without fire, nothing changes. With fire, the world itself is reshaped. Wind is invisible, yet its presence is felt in everything it touches. It carries the voices of forests, shapes the surface of the sea, bends the trees that reach toward the sky. It has no form of its own, but it reveals the forms of other things, exposing what is weak, testing what is strong. To Musashi, wind represented the ways of others, their schools, their traditions, their styles of combat and thought. While earth was the grounding of self, water the flow of adaptability, and fire the surge of decisive action, wind was the outward gaze. It was the element that required a warrior to look beyond his own training and his own preferences, to study the methods of others, not to imitate, but to understand. Musashi knew that many fighters became enclosed within their own schools. They repeated what their teachers had taught, clung to familiar patterns, and never questioned whether their methods suited every situation. This made them predictable, like a tree that has grown in one direction for so long it cannot bend without breaking. Musashi, who had fought duel after duel against men from these schools, recognized the value of understanding their wind. He studied their movements, their strategies, their philosophies, until he could see through them as clearly as one sees through glass. He knew where they were strong, but more importantly, he saw where they were vulnerable. The art of wind, then, was the art of understanding others, of listening deeply to the rhythms that guided them. Musashi believed that every person, every school, carried not only strengths, but blind spots. Some valued speed, but sacrificed balance. Some valued ceremony, but wasted time. Some valued power, but lost subtlety. By observing others carefully, by letting their wind blow through him, he could sense these weaknesses, and when the time came, he could strike at them with precision. But Musashi's study of wind was not born only of combat. He applied the same principle to life itself. In markets and villages, he would watch how people walked, how they spoke, how they carried themselves. A man who boasts loudly often hides insecurity. A man who grows quiet may carry a confidence that requires no display. In this way, Musashi trained himself to sense character as keenly as a sailor senses the shift of wind at sea. He taught that to live strategically was to be aware not only of one's own path, but of the patterns of others, to know their habits, their strengths, and their weaknesses. In his writings, Musashi warned against arrogance. To dismiss the ways of others as inferior was to close the eyes to lessons they might hold. He urged his readers to study all paths, to learn from all schools, to see with clarity rather than prejudice. He wrote that even if another's method seemed flawed, it carried insight into the mind that created it, and by understanding that mind, one could anticipate its movements. Wind was not about imitation, but about comprehension, about letting the invisible currents of others' choices and traditions become visible to the strategist who paid attention. Wind also taught humility. For Musashi, to study others was to admit that no man held all wisdom. He wandered as a ronin, not bound to any single tradition, precisely so that he could encounter them all. Each duel was not only a contest but a lesson. Each opponent revealed something about the way people trained, thought, and acted. Musashi absorbed these lessons, sometimes by watching, sometimes by fighting, always by remaining open. He allowed the wind of others to pass through him, never resisting, but never being swept away. This openness made him a mirror in combat. He could reflect an opponent's style back to them, echo their movements, and in doing so, expose the flaws they had not seen. Fighters who relied on rigid forms often found themselves trapped by their own predictability, while Musashi flowed freely, having already studied the limits of their wind. In this way, he became not only a master of his own art, but a master of understanding others. There is a gentleness in wind as well. It whispers through leaves, carrying secrets softly. To embody wind was also to learn to listen, to be sensitive to subtle signals that others might ignore. A glance, a breath, a hesitation, these were like gusts of air that revealed what was hidden. Musashi taught that by cultivating attentiveness, one could sense these small currents and know the spirit of another before a sword was ever drawn. In life, this practice teaches us to understand people not only by their words, but by their silences, not only by their actions, but by the pauses between them. Just as wind reveals the presence of mountains by the way it curls around them, so too do people reveal themselves in the way they respond to pressure, to change, to stillness. Musashi invites us to observe these patterns, to learn from them, and to walk with the awareness that every encounter is an opportunity to understand more deeply. As you rest now, imagine the wind moving softly through the night. You cannot see it, but you can hear it in the branches. Feel it against your skin. Sense it carrying the scent of the earth. In its movement, you understand its presence. Musashi's teaching is like this, an invitation to notice the unseen currents that shape others, to learn from them without clinging, to let their wind pass through you until you know its rhythm. In this way, you too may see clearly, and in that clarity, find strength. Void is the most mysterious of Musashi's 5 elements, and perhaps the most profound. Where earth grounds, water flows, fire burns, and wind teaches, void transcends them all. It is the space between, the emptiness that holds everything, yet cannot be grasped. For Musashi, void was the final stage of mastery, the state where one moves without thought, where action arises from pure awareness, where form dissolves into formlessness. It is nothingness, but in that nothingness lies freedom. To understand void, one must first set aside the fear of emptiness. Many cling to form, to methods, to certainty, because the absence of them feels like chaos. But Musashi saw that true mastery lies not in clinging but in letting go. In void, there is no attachment to technique, no reliance on rigid strategy, no dependence on desire or fear. The mind becomes open, spacious, clear. From this openness, action flows naturally, without hesitation. He described void as the realm where nothing is, yet everything is possible. In combat, it was the state of acting without deliberate thought. The sword moves because it must, not because the mind orders it. The body responds without delay, guided by awareness that is deeper than conscious calculation. In void, there is no separation between self and action, no gap between perception and movement. It is the ultimate unity, like the silence before a sound, like the breath before speech, like the stillness before dawn. Musashi's meditation on void was not confined to battle. He saw it as the essence of life itself. The world is filled with form, mountains, rivers, bodies, traditions, but all these forms arise from and return to emptiness. Void is the source that cannot be named, the silence that underlies every sound, the space that allows all things to exist. By meditating on void, Musashi was pointing toward the truth that mastery of life requires embracing this emptiness, this pure awareness beyond attachment. He often wrote of the importance of seeing what cannot be seen. In combat, this meant anticipating the unseen strike, the hidden intention. In life, it meant perceiving the invisible patterns, the currents beneath events, the silence between words. Void was the eye that sees beyond surface, the awareness that penetrates illusion. To dwell in void was to live beyond fear, beyond desire, beyond the distractions that cloud perception. Musashi knew that many feared the idea of nothingness. To them, emptiness suggested death, loss, absence. But he saw that void was not barren but fertile, like the empty field ready to receive seeds, like the still mind ready to receive clarity. In void, there is freedom from all constraints, freedom to respond fully to whatever arises, freedom to live in the moment without clinging to past or future. In his final years, when Musashi retreated to the cave at Raigondo, he spent long hours in contemplation of this void. Surrounded by stone, with silence pressing in, he faced the emptiness directly. He let it strip away all illusions, until only pure awareness remained. In that awareness, he found peace, not in possession, not in victory, but in the spaciousness of being itself. To live in void, Musashi wrote, was to move without hesitation, to perceive without distortion, to act without attachment. It was to be like the sky, vast and open, holding all clouds yet never bound by them. In this way, the strategist becomes free. In this way, the warrior becomes whole. As you drift now into the quiet of sleep, you may feel the presence of void around you, the space of the room, the silence between sounds, the stillness between breaths. This emptiness is not frightening. It is soft, spacious, peaceful. Within it lies freedom, the freedom to let go, to rest, to simply be. Musashi's void is not distant or abstract. It is here, in this silence, in this stillness, in this moment of pure awareness, and in resting within it, you touch the heart of his wisdom. In the final years of his life, Musashi turned away from the clamor of duels, from the roads that had carried him across Japan, and from the noise of men seeking his name and his reputation. His body had grown older, marked by scars and years of relentless training. His hands, once so quick with the sword, now carried a different kind of weight, the burden of memory, of insight, of a lifetime distilled into wisdom. And so he retreated, not into the halls of a castle, nor into the comfort of a wealthy home, but into the silence of a cave carved into the side of a mountain. Raigando, it was called, the Cave of Spiritual Rock. The cave was small, barren, and austere. Its walls bore the cold dampness of stone, and light filtered in only faintly, leaving shadows in which one could almost hear the echoes of one's own thoughts. For many, such a place would have been unbearable, a prison of solitude and silence. But for Musashi, it was sanctuary. It was here, away from the distractions of the world, that he could finally set his brush to paper and write down the truths he had carried in his heart through decades of wandering and conflict. It was here that he composed the Book of 5 Rings, the work that would outlive his body, and with it, he also wrote the Dokodo, the Path of Aloneness, a list of 21 precepts distilled from a life of discipline. Each morning, Musashi would wake in the cave and listen to the sounds around him, the rustle of wind in the trees, the drip of water from the stone above, the call of birds echoing across the valley. These were no longer mere background sounds. They were companions, teachers, reminders that nature itself lived and breathed in rhythm with his spirit. He had spent his youth battling men, but in these final years, he wrestled only with himself, sharpening his awareness in solitude, polishing his spirit until it reflected the clarity of still water. Writing became his sword. Where once he cut down opponents, now he carved truth into words. He did not decorate his writing with flourishes or embellishments. His words were plain, direct, sharp. They were written not for beauty but for clarity, not for reputation but for transmission. He wrote as he had fought, with precision, with purpose, with no wasted movement. The brush became an extension of his spirit, just as the sword once had been. The Book of 5 Rings was not an instruction manual for swordsmanship alone. It was a guide to life, a map of strategy that could be applied to any path, any endeavor. Musashi wrote of earth, of water, of fire, of wind, and of void. He explained that a warrior must learn to ground himself like earth, to adapt like water, to act decisively like fire, to understand others like wind, and to dissolve into pure awareness like void. Each lesson was shaped by his experience in battle, but each carried truth beyond the battlefield. A carpenter, a farmer, a poet, or a leader could all learn from his words. For Musashi was not merely teaching how to wield a sword, he was teaching how to live. The Dokodo, written only days before his death, distilled his philosophy even further. 21 precepts, simple yet profound. Do not cling to possessions. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. Accept everything as it is. Resentment and complaint are useless. Honor and reputation are illusions. Live with detachment. These were not abstractions for him. They were principles he had lived by, tested in the fire of hardship, proven in the silence of solitude. Each precept was like a stone laid upon the path he had walked, a path of self-discipline and clarity. Musashi's retreat into the cave was not a withdrawal from life, but a final offering. He had spent his youth and middle years testing himself against others, proving his philosophy in the crucible of combat. Now, as his body weakened, he turned inward, leaving behind words that others could carry into their own struggles. In this way, he ensured that his spirit would outlive him, flowing like a river into the hearts of generations yet to come. There is something deeply moving about this image. The greatest swordsman of Japan, undefeated in over 60 duels, choosing to end his life not in the blaze of battle, but in the stillness of a cave, brush in hand, ink staining the paper. He did not cling to glory or long for fame. He sought only to leave behind the truth as he had seen it, stripped of ornament, bare as stone, sharp as steel. And when the time came, he laid down his brush, accepted the emptiness of void, and allowed his body to return to the earth that had grounded him all his life. As you imagine him there in the cave, let the silence of that place settle around you. The stone walls are cool and steady. The air carries the faint scent of moss and earth. A man sits quietly, writing words that will travel centuries. His face calm, his heart still. There is no need for noise, no need for applause. Only the quiet rhythm of brushstrokes, the whisper of wisdom being born. In that silence, Musashi's final retreat becomes not an ending, but a return to stillness, to truth, to the simplicity of being. The story of Musashi is not simply about swords or battles. It is the story of a man who learned that the hardest opponent to defeat is the self. In every duel, in every moment of solitude, in every rejection of wealth or fame, Musashi was not only conquering others, but conquering his own ego. His journey shows us what it means to practice self-mastery, to discipline the mind and heart, until one can move freely, without being enslaved by pride, fear, or desire. From his earliest years, Musashi understood that the ego is restless. It craves recognition, clings to victory, fears humiliation. Many warriors of his time entered duels, not for truth but for pride. They wished to be admired, to be remembered, to feed the hunger of the self. Musashi saw through this. He knew that such desires weakened a man. A warrior who fights for his name fights with distraction. He fears loss, and in that fear, he falters. Musashi learned to fight without ego, to release the need for reputation, to act purely in the moment. In this freedom, he found an edge sharper than any blade. Self-mastery for Musashi began with discipline of the body. He trained endlessly, repeating motions until they became effortless, walking long distances with little food, enduring hardship without complaint. By pushing the body beyond comfort, he weakened the grip of desire. Hunger, pain, fatigue, these no longer controlled him. He became master of his body by refusing to yield to its complaints. Yet he did not stop there. He turned the same discipline toward the mind. The mind, he realized, is the true battlefield. It invents illusions, clings to outcomes, and deceives itself with pride. Musashi trained his mind as he trained his sword. He watched his thoughts, observed his attachments, and cut them away like weeds. He rejected unnecessary desires, refused to dwell on victories, refused to fear defeat. In doing so, he freed himself from the storms of the ego. His calmness in duels, his patience in strategy, his detachment from wealth and fame, all were the fruits of this inner mastery. Self-mastery also meant honesty. Musashi looked directly at reality, without comforting illusions. He did not deceive himself with false hopes or excuses. He faced weakness with clarity, admitting faults so that he could overcome them. Many cling to illusions of strength, pretending to be more than they are, but Musashi stripped such illusions away. By knowing himself honestly, he could sharpen himself honestly. He could grow without being hindered by the lies the ego tells. The journey of Musashi shows us that self-mastery is not the absence of struggle, but the willingness to face struggle directly. He lived without excess, trained without ceasing, and embraced solitude to confront the depths of his own mind. He knew that a man who cannot control himself will never master others. To govern the sword, one must govern the hand. To govern the hand, one must govern the mind. And to govern the mind, one must conquer the ego. His lessons remain clear for us even today. Self-mastery is not about defeating the world, but about refusing to be defeated by one's own impulses. It is the ability to let go of pride when insulted, to remain calm when provoked, to act with clarity rather than anger, to rest when rest is needed without being enslaved by laziness. Musashi's life reminds us that freedom is not in indulging every desire, but in mastering them. A man who desires nothing cannot be controlled. A man who fears nothing cannot be defeated. In the end, Musashi's greatest victory was not over the many swordsmen he defeated, nor over the warriors who fell before him in duels. His greatest victory was over himself. He lived and died free, unattached, his spirit clear, his words sharp. His cave was empty, yet filled with wisdom. His hands were bare, yet carried truths that continue to guide. As you drift now toward sleep, consider this lesson of self-mastery. The ego is loud, restless, and demanding, but like a storm, it passes when you do not cling to it. Beneath it lies the calm mountain of your own spirit, steady and still. Musashi's journey shows us that the way to peace is not in conquering others, but in conquering the self. And as the night deepens, you too may rest in that peace, free from pride, free from fear, resting in the clarity that comes when the ego is silent. Sleep, to Musashi, would not have been a careless collapse into unconsciousness, but another battlefield of the self, another arena in which discipline, clarity, and presence were required. The restless mind is not unlike an untrained swordsman, thrashing wildly, cutting at shadows, unable to distinguish between illusion and truth. Many people today know this restlessness well. They lie in bed, and their thoughts run like startled horses, galloping from past regrets to future worries, replaying old conversations, imagining battles that do not exist. For Musashi, this was no different from stepping into a duel unprepared, letting the noise of the mind dictate the rhythm instead of finding stillness in the center of chaos. To understand how Musashi's principles can quiet the restless mind, one must look at how he lived his life. He rejected distractions, stripped away excess, and practiced solitude until he could hear the faintest whisper of his own thoughts without fear. He knew that the mind, like water, must be still if it is to reflect clearly. If it is agitated, the reflection is distorted. For Musashi, this was not only about combat, but about being itself. When he wrote of water, he was teaching us to let thoughts flow, to let them pass, not to grasp at them, not to cling. In sleep, the same principle applies. To rest deeply, one must stop clutching at thoughts, and instead let them drift like leaves on a stream, carried away into stillness. He also embodied the principle of detachment, the same detachment he taught when he rejected wealth, fame, and comfort. Restlessness often comes from clinging to what happened today, to what may happen tomorrow, to what others think of us, to the endless web of desires and fears. Musashi trained himself to hold nothing too tightly. To sleep like Musashi is to let go, to accept the night as it is, without grasping for control. The ego resists this surrender, but Musashi's way shows that true freedom comes when control is released. Timing, too, was central to his philosophy. Just as he waited for the precise moment to strike, he knew there was a rhythm to all things. Sleep is part of that rhythm. The body, like the seasons, has its cycles. To resist them is to struggle. To align with them is to find harmony. Musashi would advise listening to the body, trusting the natural rhythm of breath and heart, moving with it instead of against it. When the rhythm is trusted, the body naturally drifts into sleep. The mind naturally follows. Musashi also spoke of void, the emptiness beyond form, the pure awareness that remains when thoughts are set aside. Sleep can be seen as a return to void. In dreams and in deep rest, the self dissolves, attachments fade, the world disappears into nothingness. Many fear this dissolution, just as they fear the idea of nothingness in waking life. But Musashi taught that void is not to be feared. It is liberation, the space in which all things are possible. To enter sleep is to step into void willingly, to rest in the emptiness, to be cradled by it. Imagine Musashi in his cave, the stone walls cool, the night outside stretching silent across the valley. He lies down not in a bed of silk, but on the hard ground, with only a blanket of straw or cloth. Yet he sleeps without restlessness. His mind is clear, his spirit is light. He has let go of the day's thoughts, let go of tomorrow's plans, let go of the illusions of the self. He rests as he lived, detached, present, disciplined. His breathing slows, deepens, steady as a mountain stream. His body, worn from years of training, surrenders to stillness. In this surrender, he teaches us how to rest. For those who struggle with sleep, Musashi's way offers a guide. First, ground yourself like earth. Feel the bed beneath you, the firmness that supports you. Know that you are steady, that you are held. Then, flow like water. Let thoughts move without resistance, drifting away. Burn like fire, not in restlessness but in presence, committing fully to this moment of rest. Focusing all your energy on being here. Now, listen like wind, noticing the silence, the faint sounds around you, the rhythm of your own breath. Finally, dissolve into void, into the emptiness that holds you, without judgment, without demand. In this way, sleep becomes not a struggle but a practice. Another form of Musashi's path, as you breathe now. Slow and calm. Let these principles settle into you. The restless mind softens. The body grows heavy. The rhythm of life carries you gently toward sleep. As Musashi's principles guide you into stillness, his way was not only for warriors, not only for battles, but for all who seek peace. Tonight, you may rest as he rested, clear and calm, unshaken, flowing, present, and free. There comes a time in every journey when words must fade, when teaching must dissolve into silence, when the only lesson left is presence itself. Musashi's life was filled with battles, wanderings, and writings, but beyond them all lies something greater, the eternal warrior within, the part of us that seeks clarity, courage, and peace. His story, though rooted in feudal Japan, is also the story of every human being who has struggled with fear, desire, restlessness, and pride. It is the story of learning to master oneself. The eternal warrior within is not defined by swords or victories, but by stillness, by awareness, by the courage to live fully in each moment. Musashi showed us that true strength is not found in defeating others, but in conquering the illusions of the self. He walked the path of solitude, discipline, and detachment, not to escape life, but to embrace it more fully, to see it clearly, to live without fear. His lessons remain alive in us, in the quiet spaces where we face our own battles, in the restless nights where we seek peace, in the choices we make each day between clarity and confusion. To awaken the eternal warrior within is to remember the principles Musashi embodied, to stand firm like earth, unshaken by storms, to flow like water, adapting to change without resistance, to act like fire, decisive and present when the moment calls, to listen like wind, understanding others, learning from them without arrogance, and to rest in void, the emptiness that is not absence but freedom. These are not only the elements of combat, they are the elements of life, the elements of peace, the elements of rest. As you close your eyes, you may imagine yourself walking alongside Musashi. The road stretches before you, quiet and endless, the sky above wide and clear. He carries little, yet his presence is immense. He does not rush, does not linger. Each step is deliberate, grounded, free. His silence speaks more than words, and in that silence, you feel your own spirit settle. You walk not behind him, not ahead, but with him, side by side, sharing the same rhythm. Eventually, the road leads to a mountain. At its base lies the cave of Regando, where Musashi wrote his final words. You enter with him, the air cool, the stone walls embracing you with stillness. You sit together in the quiet. No words are needed. You feel the weight of his presence, the calmness of his spirit, the peace of his detachment. This is the eternal warrior, not the duelist, not the wanderer, not even the writer, but the man who mastered himself so completely that he could rest in emptiness without fear. And now, you are invited to do the same, to let go of the day, with its noise and demands, to release the battles of the mind, the illusions of ego, the clinging of desire, to rest in the stillness that Musashi found, to allow yourself to be carried by the rhythm of breath, the steady beating of your heart, the silence that surrounds you. In this stillness, you are not separate from him. His way becomes your way. His clarity becomes your clarity. His peace becomes your peace. Sleep is the gateway into this eternal stillness. As you sink deeper, you join Musashi in the cave, in the quiet beyond thought, in the void where there is no fear, no desire, no battle, only rest. Here, the eternal warrior within you awakens not in struggle, but in surrender, not in noise, but in silence, not in tension, but in peace. Let the darkness of night become your teacher. Let the silence carry you. Let your breath guide you, steady and calm. With each inhale, you draw in clarity. With each exhale, you release attachment. Slowly, gently, you drift deeper, carried by Musashi's wisdom, guided by the eternal warrior within. Rest now. You are safe. You are steady. You are free. The battles of the day are behind you. The stillness of the night is before you. Musashi's way is here, within you, timeless and eternal. And as you surrender to sleep, you walk the path he walked, into peace, into clarity, into the infinite stillness of the eternal warrior within. Rest easy now. Let Musashi's wisdom carry you into deep and peaceful sleep. Your battles are over for today, and tomorrow will bring its own rhythm. But for now, you deserve calm and quiet dreams. If you are still awake, let your journey continue by clicking one of the 2 videos on your screen. Each will guide you further along the path of stillness and strength. And if you found peace in this story, remember to subscribe, so you'll always have a place to return when you need rest, reflection, and the wisdom to guide your nights. Sleep well,